previously on I Make Everything. Seriously though, it's not actually ruined. It's like a nice thick wool flannel. It'll make a really nice warm winter shirt. Alright, let's do that thing. I learned to make shirts a few years ago in order to make exciting ones for my partner, and in developing his pattern, and subsequently teaching a series of shirt making courses, I developed a system for drafting a shirt pattern which I am about to share with you. So you too can make your own shirt, and not just any generic shirt, but one that fits you, both body and personality, however outlandish either of those things is. Buckle up though, this series is not going to pull punches. This is pretty advanced stuff, but I do hope to help you really understand it in a way that will enable you to wing it when necessary. And my video style is quickfire and information dense, so I recommend watching once through for an overview and then watching again with the pause button and your notes in front of you. You can slow me down in the settings if you startle easily. Okay, I want to introduce you to the shirt we'll be making. It looks a bit like this in its simplest form, and it's made up of these pieces. It's got two fronts, a back which is in two parts, a shoulder yoke and the back body, two sleeves, collar bits, cuffs, and a few other little bits that we'll talk about later. But for the actual pattern, we can delete any duplicate shapes, and some symmetrical bits can get caught in the fold, so this is more like what we're actually looking at drawing. And I have put a link to a PDF with these generic shapes in the description below, so you can print it out and write all over it with your measurements. So let's look at the back first. It's made up of two bits, partly because that allows you to shape it a bit across here, and partly because the yoke is in two layers for durability and also appearance. I like to use a contrast fabric for the inner layer. The shoulder seams are set a bit forward of the actual shoulder line, which is again about durability across the tops of the shoulders and also just tradition. And it looks nice. But it makes for a slightly confusing drafting process, so I'm going to temporarily move this seam back to the actual shoulder line for the moment for ease of drafting. We'll move it down again later, don't panic, just go with it. Also temporarily, I'm going to stick the two back pieces together for drafting ease. So let's start drafting the back piece. This piece is usually cut on the fold of the fabric, so we only need to draft half of it. On a great big piece of paper, draw a long straight line, as long as like your bum to your ponytail. That serves as the center back fold line. Then measure from the back of your neck where the collar would sit, there's a bony bit you can feel for, to the length you want your shirt to be, and then mark those 2 points on the line, leaving a bit of room at the top. You need to find this distance now to the side seam. Measure yourself at chest height and hip height, and in each case add a bit to that measurement because you don't want the shirt to be skin tight. The added amount is known as ease, and you can add a little or a lot as you please. On me, I'd say 15 centimeters would be about right for a not tight but not baggy fit. So let's say you measured 130 centimeters and you take that up to 145 with the ease. That number is going to be the full circumference of the shirt. So you want about half of it at the back because we're drawing only half of the back. That's more like about a quarter of the measurement. Although you might have more of you at the front or at the back, so you might skew that a little bit to accommodate that. Just keep track if you do so that the total circumference ends up right. If your chest and hip measurements were different, this line might end up slanted. That's fine. The hem will run horizontally from this point, and it can just be straight, or you can do a little flourish of shirt tails if you're feeling fancy. Bear in mind the hemming will be a little more fiddly if you do that, but it does look nice. Okay, the next lines get a bit wishy-washy, bear with me. Find the point on the side of your neck where your shoulder hits it, and maybe put a little mark there because you'll be wanting to use it a few times. Measure between there and the center of the back of your neck where the knobbly bit was. Now draw a slight curve that long here so that this end is horizontal and that end is about 2 to 3 centimeters above the start point. Don't exaggerate this curve, this bit is not aiming to be vertical. By the way, this is my moment to recommend you get one of these bendy rulers from your nearest small independent sewing shop. They are super useful in pattern drafting, but if you haven't got one, you can make do with a tape held on edge or a ruler that you swivel around a series of points. It's awkward, but you can make it work. For shoulder slope, I use about a 15-degree angle, which you can just eyeball, or you can fold the corner of a piece of paper in thirds and then one of those thirds in half, and that's 15 degrees. Run a line down at that angle from the side neck point. Measure across the back of your shoulders from shoulder point to shoulder point, feel for the knobbly bits, and then add like 3 to 5 centimeters for ease. And then half that measurement will be where you end your shoulder slope. To find the bottom of the armscye, great word that, armscye, Scots in origin I believe, put the tape quite horizontally around your chest at the height you'd expect the armpits of a shirt to be, not like right up there, but not too low either. Now, measure from that horizontal line up to the neck point, up the middle of your back. You might need another human to help you with this. And that gives you the height of the underarm point, which you can mark on your pattern. This last curve you kind of have to wing. It won't go further in than a couple of centimeters from here, and it will be approximately square here and here. And it will just be a lovely sweeping curve between the two. Lightly pencil it until you're happy, and then erase all the false starts. There you go. 1 piece down, 8 to go. Have a cup of tea. The good news is the front bit is really quite a lot like the back for drafting purposes, so I'll breeze through some of it quite quickly and then probably confuse and alarm you a bit towards the end. Sorry. The center front edge is drawn much the same and is not a fold like it was on the back, which doesn't matter for drafting purposes, but it sure does for cutting, so mark it carefully, and leave a little space on your paper here for reasons I'll explain later. These 2 points are measured as before, but from the collar point down to the hem. Side seam distances are as before, but if you skewed the back measurements down because you have more of you up front, you need to skew these up to make the total come out right. The hemline, you can do whatever you did before, bearing in mind you might move this point in the end game adjustments, so just pencil it lightly for now. You can measure your neck curve in the same way you did for the back, so from here to here, but then double check it by adding those 2 figures together and doubling it to get the full neck measurement, and then make sure a tape around your neck at that length feels right. If it's feeling loose, adjust the front as necessary, and if it's feeling tight, maybe adjust or maybe just leave it, because it's easy to fix that later by just cutting away a bit more fabric. That's normal in custom pattern drafting. We expect to make some amendments during the rest of the process. I would say to put this point about 8 to 10 centimeters above this point and maybe like 6 to 8 centimeters in, but your curve of the right length needs to run between them looking something like this, so do push those dots around a bit if you need to. I'm sorry this is really wishy-washy, but A, fabric is really forgiving at this scale, and B, if it's really wrong later on, we can redraw when you find that out. Again, we expect to make some amendments here and there as we go along. The shoulder seam line should be the same angle as on the back piece and the same length, so take this measurement from the back piece shoulder seam. Now then, the arm's eye. How do we find this point? Well, we just kind of fudge it. Initially, let's place it quite arbitrarily by making the side seams on the front the same length as the ones on the back. Then let's get a measurement by putting a tape round an imaginary arm's eye on you, so from shoulder point under your arm and back up to shoulder point. Not at all tight, but not super dangly loose either. And note the result. Subtract from that however much is already taken up on the back piece, and that leaves you with the figure you're going to have to make work on the front piece. So you need to make a curve between these 2 points with a length of whatever you just found from your measurements. If it looks like this, great. It does want to be a little more ample looking than on the back because your arms bend more forward than they bend back. But if it looks more like this, we're going to need to adjust something. And I'm going to suggest 2 things. 1, was your arm's eye measurement a bit generous? If you think it might have been, take it again, as snug as you're willing, and redo the calculation for the curve. It's really not a bad thing to make this arm's eye a tiny bit small because making it bigger is really easy. You just cut away more fabric. And 2, if your arm's eye measurement is checking out and you still can't make this curve look nice and demure, move the underarm point on both pieces down a bit. That'll ease the strain on the front of the curve, as well as shortening it slightly by taking up a bit more of the total in the back piece. And this brings me to a note about boobs. If you have them, this whole exercise will have been more awkward and difficult, and the resulting shirt isn't even going to fit that well for the effort because we are not really taking them into account properly here. A tailored shirt for people with boobs has a dart or 2 somewhere in this area to accommodate them, and I'm leaving that for the 3rd video in the series because I want to keep this as simple as I can. But my fellow boob havers, I implore you to stick with me because especially if you are curvy, you may never have had a properly fitted shirt, and it is a revelation. Anyway, I'm going to leave you to struggle with any weirdnesses that may have occurred. Try to make sure that the side seams and the shoulder seams are the same length on the front and the back. Check that the overall neck and arm's eye measurements kind of work, and move points and curves around until you can square that circle, so to speak. If in doubt, make openings too small and then we can cut them bigger in the first fitting. Right. Front piece done. From here it gets easier, I swear. Let's do the sleeves. This piece is symmetrical and can be drafted on the fold, so we'll start with the long straight line again. You do need to cut 2 of these, so if you prefer, you can make your final pattern piece this shape and place it only once when cutting on the fold. But for drafting purposes, it's always easier to draw only half of any symmetrical piece. The length from shoulder point to where the cuff meets can be this measurement on you initially. The addition of a cuff will make it a bit longer, which it needs to be for when you bend your arm. There are lots of complicated and difficult ways of measuring this, but I just add a cuff to that measurement and it seems to work pretty well. You can always micro adjust it at the first fitting. Take arm girth measurements at the upper arm and forearm and add a bit of ease to each measurement, maybe between 5 and 10 centimeters. Cut these in half because half a sleeve and mark them on the pattern at about the right height. And then lightly sketch a straight line between them and beyond. The bottom edge of the sleeves is perpendicular to the fold, so you can mark that in. And the top edge is this funny sine wave shape. What's going on there is that if you take a cylinder, which a sleeve kind of is, and hold it on a slant, as sleeves often are at rest, and then slice it through, That sine wave is the shape that the edge ends up when it's flattened out. So that total arm side measurement from both front and back pieces, cut in half because half is sleeve, will be the length of this curvy edge. And the height of the underarm point will be below the shoulder point by this much. Use your second human to help you get that measurement. So you place your underarm point on the slanty line and you try to make a curve of the right length go from here to here in a nice, smooth, not abrupt curve. And what usually happens is that the curve ends up being pretty abrupt. Well, you can't change the length of that line, but what you can do is change the sleeve circumference at the top. And in fact, if you bend this line out a little bit towards the top, that will make for better arm mobility in the finished shirt. Try to keep this angle about square to the fold line and this angle square to the underarm line, wherever that ends up. What happens in here is up to you, really. Further this way will be a roomier sleeve, and further that way will be slimmer fitting. Honestly, you can get away with a lot in this area. Don't sweat it too much. Sweat it? Underarms? Never mind. And like I said, you might want to have this pattern piece be a full sleeve rather than half, so if so, just trace it on one side and then flip it and trace it again. Cuffs are super easy to draft because they're just a rectangle. This measurement is however big you'd like your cuff to be, including ease, plus 2 to 3 centimeters for the button overlap. And this measurement is whatever you fancy. If you want to be told what to do, go with 7 or 8 centimeters. Cuffs also have this magical sleeve placket thingy to move the sleeve opening round from the underarm seam to where you can see it so you're not hiding your fancy buttons. It's kind of witchcrafty and hard to figure out until you've done it like 10 times. I've put a link to a PDF of that bit of the pattern ready to cut, seam allowances included, in the description. I'll explain more about it when we make the shirt. For now, just print it out and put it with the pattern. The sleeve placket is easily the fiddliest and most difficult part of this process. If you're feeling skittish, skip it, and the cuffs, and just make a short sleeve shirt by hemming the bottom of the sleeve as desired. But please try it. The results are so impressive and you'll be so proud of yourself when you do it. The center front of the shirt has buttons and they want a bit of reinforcing so they don't gape. I do this by binding the front edge in a sandwich of 2 pieces of fabric and maybe some interfacing, and that's how I've designed this pattern. But you could equally extend that front edge by enough to fold it back on itself and stitch it down, maybe add a strip of iron-on interfacing. That would be much simpler. But it wouldn't look as good, because with my way, you can use your contrast fabric on the back sides of the button bands, and also the whole thing just looks like it was harder to do, like you put more effort into it, and that always looks good. So you're going to cut 4 of these, and they're all the same, just a rectangle, as tall as the front edge of your front piece, plus a little for luck, and as wide as you like. I go with 4 centimeters. Now then, the middle of these, where the buttons and buttonholes will be, wants to end up the actual center front line, right? So because it's 4 centimeters wide, 2 centimeters of the front of each side is taken up there. So technically you would maybe remove 2 centimeters all up the front edge here. I actually never bother, and it took me ages to realize I was making shirts a few centimeters bigger than I meant to. So I guess it's not a deal breaker. Unless you're extremely keen to sail close to the slim fit wind, you can also not bother about that detail. There are 2 parts of a collar, the actual collar, which stands up and folds over, and the collar band, which encloses the neck opening and holds the collar in place. You can, and I often do, skip the actual collar and just use the collar band to make a collarless or granddad shirt. But draft both pieces just in case and decide later. Both can be drafted on the fold, and like with the sleeve, you can trace it in full once it's drafted in case you want to cut it flat rather than folded. For the collar band, the bottom edge is going to enclose the neck opening, so you need to make this length match the total of these 2 edges plus the 4 centimeters for the top of the button bands. It can be a straight line, some shirts do that, and the collar band will stand straight up off the neck like a column. But I prefer to curve it slightly and soften that line. Draw whatever curviness of curve you feel like and mark the end with that measurement from a minute ago. The top edge is about 2.5 centimeters above the bottom edge all the way along, and the front bit is curved in a sort of quarter circle. And that's that done. The collar bit of the collar's bottom edge can be straight or curved a bit in the mirror of the collar band. It will make a slight difference to the way that the collar lays in the end, and there's some leeway for style there. Experiment till you find something you like. The bottom wants to be as long as this line up to this point, since that's where it's going to sit. And the rest of it is a little bit anything goes. What I've drawn here is a fairly classic shape, about 7 centimeters tall in the middle and going a little bit pointy at the tips. You can make it super pointy and huge, or tiny and demure and rounded, or whatever you want, really. So in the beginning, we moved a shoulder seam and united 2 back pieces. Let's undo all of that. On the back piece, you can cut it, literally cut it, with scissors, not your sewing scissors, perpendicular to the fold line, kind of wherever looks good to you across the upper back to form the yoke piece. You can slightly shape this seam by curving up here and or down here by no more than about 1 centimeter or so. And bearing in mind that that will reduce your overall arm side measurement, so whack 1 centimeter off your sleeve block at the same time. To move the shoulder seam line forward again, lay the front and the yoke piece together, shoulder to shoulder like this, tape them together, and cut a few centimeters down, maybe 8 or 10, whatever looks good to you. You can retrace the pattern or just leave it a taped together Frankenstein. Most of my patterns are a taped together Frankenstein. I'm certainly not going to judge you. My darlings, you are basically done. But heads up, at the moment it's a pattern without seam allowance, so one way or another you need to add that on all edges except fold edges. You can leave it like this and remember to cut it with seam allowance added at the time that you cut it. Some people do that. Personally, I'm incapable of remembering to do that, so I add seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters at the relevant edges on all the paper pieces and then write down that I have done that because my memory is just not going to help me out. Write down everything you did and which piece goes where and what pattern this is in the first place, because you will forget. If not now, wait till you get older, you will forget. And then find something to amuse yourself with until you watch the next video where we will cut, assemble, and finish this lovely creature. See you soon.